So, my research question was: Is aggressive behavior socially driven, and what are some of the risk factors associated with aggressive behavior in adolescents and young adults? So, in my research, I found some potential risk factors for developing aggressive behavior, those being social exclusion, media violence and desensitization, emotional control, inhibitory controls, and socio-environmental factors, along with genetics as well. It was concluded that social exclusion and violent media appears to be the driving risk factors associated with aggression or developing aggressive behavior. Aggression is a word that we use every day to characterize behaviors. There's a large spectrum of behaviors that fall under the umbrella of, aggressive behavior, that being physical and non-physical. Physical being, kicking or hitting somebody, non-physical being, taunting, bullying, gossiping about somebody. And more recently, psychologist researchers have questioned what really affects and influences having, possessing aggressive behavior. Is it genetics? Is it the environment? Is it socially driven? Or is it a combination of all three? Or, that kind of thing. So there has been an abundance of research since like the 80s about all of this. So I narrowed my search to like 2000 and on, and I tried to keep my demographic in, kind of the same group, but it was a little hard to do that. I tried to keep from like 13 to 30, I guess, but it was a little hard. And the first study was about social exclusion, and basically, this was done in the workplace. It was people ages 21 to 30. And the social exclusion was manipulated by the researchers by telling one participant that they were going to end up alone, and the other participant had rejected them. And then they were asked to give that person a job evaluation, and it ended up being a poor evaluation about the other person. And the person never confronted that other individual and had said most participants said it was not mediated by emotions, but strictly social exclusion. The next study talked more about genetics, environmental factors, and social factors as well. So kind of the mix of all three. So it had started by talking about low levels of serotonin and dopamine contributing to the development of aggressive behavior, and that prenatal exposure to tobacco and alcohol and controlled substances can damage the brain and potentially cause aggressive behavior as well, along with something called intrauterine, I can't pronounce that, hypoxia at birth, which is when the baby can't get enough oxygen, and that can damage the hippocampus, which is associated with aggressive behavior. And in addition to that, if the child is being neglected or abused or experienced early maternal rejection, those can be risk factors as well. And combined with genetic factors, that can be something that causes more aggressive behavior. And so it was concluded that the biological and socio-environmental factors both contributed, and that this can also cause poor or lack of adequate social skills, which can cause social exclusion. So I found that really interesting, and they end up getting, potentially bullied as well. Another study was done about aggressive behavior and inhibitory control, which is the ability to suppress a strong tendency to act, and is an important component in suppressing aggressive behavior. So they were undergraduate students, 21 to 24, and they played a competitive reaction game with an unknown opponent, and whoever was slower would receive a high-pitched noise through the headphones as a punishment. And at the beginning of the trial, participants would select the level of punishment the opponent would receive. So the results showed in interactive effect of emotional regulation and inhibitory control, predicting aggressive behavior. So for individuals low inhibitory control, who were better at emotional regulation showed less aggressive behavior than those with worse emotional regulation. For individuals with better inhibitory control, however, emotion regulation had no significant effect on aggressive behavior. So it was concluded that inhibitory control was the main factor in execution of aggressive behavior. And then the next studies, the next two, were about violent media and desensitization playing a role in aggressive behavior, and these were more recently in 2017. So at Iowa State, they sent a survey to around 2,000 adolescents and young adults in Australia, China, Croatia, Germany, Japan, and Romania, and the US, and the average is the kid was 21. And they asked them to list their most frequently watched TV shows, movies, and video games, and they collected data on aggressive behavior and empathy as well. It was concluded that violent media use was significantly related to aggressive behavior in all countries, and exposure was related to heightened aggressive thinking and lowered empathy. And this conclusion was strengthened by the results from another study in 2011. So the undergrads watched a range of TV shows and movies within a time period, and they were given a questionnaire before and after regarding how they felt, their behavior, or emotional states, and there was a significant increase in aggressive cognitions and a decrease in pro-social behavior and empathy. So after completing my research, I found that 3 out of the 5 studies either directly or indirectly involved social exclusion, and that can be a main driving factor potentially, but there needs to be more research because not all of them mention that. Same thing went for violent media and desensitization. 2 out of 5 mention emotional control, so more research would need to be done to confirm that. One study covered inhibitory control and aggressive behavior, so it doesn't really seem to be a large driving risk factor. Same with genetics and prenatal exposure, but I'm sure there's an abundance of research out there that can back those claims up. So overall, the 2 main risk factors for aggressive behavior in adolescents and young adults appear to be social exclusion and violent media, according to the studies evaluated.